Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to explain the differences between spondylitis, spondylosis, spondylolysis and spondylolisthesis. These terms you've probably heard of before and you've seen them in radiology reports, but at least in my experience, it's really difficult to remember what each of them actually mean, as they're just really different, or rather how exactly they're different. So in the next few minutes I'm going to explain what they each are very clearly and help you understand and tell them apart so that you'll never forget them. And if you still somehow do, well, you might want to bookmark this video for later. And by the way, there's timestamps below for your reference. You're welcome. Anyway, let's go. Starting off with the first one, spondylitis. Now this one's easy to remember because it has the suffix itis, meaning it ends with the word itis. Okay, and everything, at least in the medical field, that ends with itis is referring to inflammation. So for example, colitis is inflammation of the colon. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. Bronchitis is inflammation of the bronchioles in the lungs. Arthritis is inflammation of the joints. Appendicitis is inflammation of the appendix. You get the idea. So there's really one form of this, and it's called ankylosing spondylitis, also sometimes called axial spondyloarthritis. That's a fun name. And as I said, it's essentially an inflammatory disease of the spine, which can cause the vertebra of the spine to fuse. And as you can imagine, that makes the spine incredibly inflexible and usually results in the patient having a hunched posture, meaning kind of leaning forward. And this is because as the condition gets worse, the body's trying to heal itself by forming new bone, which doesn't help the situation. And that bone is literally fusing the spine together to make the spine look like this. Luckily though, this is a relatively uncommon autoimmune condition, which basically means a condition in which the body is essentially attacking itself, where the prevalence is estimated to be about 0.2 to 0.5% in the US and about 0.5 to 1% in Australia, with it typically affecting younger adults between 15 and 40 years. All right, now let's move on to spondylosis. This one had the suffix osis, and it's got to do with degeneration of the spine, like OA of the spine, where it involves the age-related wear and tear of the spine, the discs and the joints, leading to joint space narrowing and bone spurs, aka osteophytes, out of the vertebra. Essentially the radiographic features we look for in OA. And the way I remember this one is that, you know how the word ends with losis? Well, that kind of reads as losis or low, L-O-W. And what happens when you have reduced disc height or joint space narrowing, right? You get like lower, right? You get shorter. That's how I remember it. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it works for me. Now this, unlike the previous one, spondylitis, is actually very common and it affects over 85% of people over 60. So you'll definitely see this term in radiology reports, or sometimes you'll just see it referred to as mild or moderate degeneration of the spine. It's really just referring to the same thing, just different words. Some use the word, some don't. But if you do see it, now you know what it means. All right, now moving on to the next one, which is spondylolysis. It's getting longer now. This one I would say is the trickiest one, so bear with me here. It's essentially a fracture in the posterior or back half of the vertebra located between the superior and inferior articular facets. Essentially the area between the pedicle and the lamina, where the pedicle connects the vertebral body to the rest of the vertebral arch at the back, and the lamina, which essentially connects the transverse processes to the spinous process at the back. Here, let me show you another way. All right, so here we have a lumbar spine. So let me show you the actual components that make it easier to understand what's going on. Obviously, we have our vertebral body over here and the rest of the vertebral arch at the back. The key structures that I was referring to were as follows. So I'm going to bring in these pins and kind of zoom in. Okay? So first of all, this over here is the superior articular process, where it articulates with it's a superior aspect of the articular process of this vertebra, which interacts with the inferior articular process of the top vertebra. Okay, so that's the superior articular process. And if you go down over here, this is the inferior articular process. Okay, so superior and inferior. I also talked about the lamina and the pedicle. Okay, so here is the lamina, where it's connecting the transverse process to the spinous process over here, so the connection here. And then over here, we have the pedicle, which connects the vertebral body to the actual rest of the structures at the back, or really vertebral body to the transverse process, if you will. Okay. So again, getting rid of these pins over here, again, we have the vertebral body in the front, transverse processes on the side, spinous process over here. It's connected via the lamina, and then the pedicle is connecting these two. Then we have our superior articular process, see how it's connecting to the other one, and the inferior articular process. Okay, and So if you've ever heard of the term the Scotty dog, this is where it comes in. So if I have my spine in AP, lateral, and then somewhat of like an oblique, you kind of see that Scotty dog appearance coming in, right? So that's the nose of the dog. That's kind of like the eye, the ears, and then the neck, okay? So a pars interarticularis, or a pars defect, is a fracture through the neck of the Scotty dog, aka right here, in between the superior and inferior articular processes, okay? So this is usually quite difficult for people to understand, and even for me as well. But if you understand the anatomy of the spine correctly, then that makes it a lot easier, okay? So vertebral body, transverse process, spinous process connected with the lamina, and then the pedicle is over here, and then we had the superior and inferior articular processes, which is in between essentially the neck of that Scotty dog. That's what happens in spondylolysis, and is essentially a stress fracture in this area, which we call the pars interarticularis, or a pars defect. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. It's tricky, I know. I always get them mixed up myself because the anatomy of the spine can get almost impossibly difficult to understand and remember. So I feel your pain, but hopefully that gave you a nice visual of everything. And we reached the final boss, spondylolisthesis. Try saying that 5 times. Spondylolisthesis, 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 spondylolisthesis. This one is basically a slip disc, where it most commonly occurs at either L5-S1 or between L4, L5. And this can occur in 2 ways. One, through degeneration or age-related wear and tear of the intervertebral disc and facet joints, which as a result just leads to instability and slippage. But the other way is because of a stress fracture in the pars interarticularis, or pars defect, which should sound familiar to you because we literally just covered it, which was spondylolysis. So a pars defect, a spondylolysis, leading to a slipped disc, we call a spondylolisthesis. Now the way I remember this one is that it has the word thesis in it, and the thesis takes forever to write. I would know because I had to write one. And when you're writing a thesis, you typically sit at your desk, you're writing for hours and hours, and you usually get a hunched back, and that leads to a lower back or repetitive strain injuries, so potentially a slipped disc. Not like actually, but that's how I remember it. And look, if you have a better way of remembering it, that's totally fine, but until then, I'm sticking with this one. So for this one, there are different grades, or essentially how severe it is. Here, let me show you. Okay, now coming back to our spine over here, we said that it either happens between L5 and S1, or between L4 and L5. So one of these two, but commonly it's mostly done through L5, S1. If you think of these areas, this one area over here, as being divided into 4 different sections, okay, and I'll do a drawing of this side by side so you can see what's going on. 4 of these. Right now, these are fully aligned, okay? If this L5 was to be slipped forward, within the first 25% of this, that'd be considered a grade 1 spondylolisthesis. Okay, so if it's going up until the 25th percentile of here, then it's grade 1. If it goes between the 25th to the 50th, so kind of 50th being the halfway line, that's grade 2. And then if it goes between the 50th and 75th, that's grade 3. And then obviously the 75th and to 100th, that's grade 4, and so on. So that's how we classify and grade the spondylolisthesis. All right, that's it. Did that make sense? Hopefully. This is how I go about remembering these conditions of the spine, and it's an approach that I found helpful, so hopefully you did too. If you enjoyed that, please give this video a like and also subscribe, as I'm doing my 10,000 subscriber giveaway. I don't want you to miss out on that. All you have to do is sub to the channel and follow me on TikTok, and you could win your own very custom X-ray markers. Now, if you like this video, I do a lot more of it in my Radiography Masterclass series, which if you don't know about it yet, I'm telling you it's a game changer. So click here to find out the details of that. And if you want to access it, send me an email at this address. See you in that video. Stay curious.